Thank you very much for staying with us. Now we have the help of the rain, making sure that you are stuck here with us until the last panel is over. So this panel, we talk about open source for Polish and European sovereignty and security, which means a lot of different things. And I will encourage the panelists to keep a very open interpretation of security and not just looking at cybersecurity. But really, we're starting to realize, not just in the open source ecosystem, but also in governments, that open source isn't a purely technical topic. It is now at the heart of ongoing debates around resilience, supply chain risk, public sector innovation, industrial competitiveness. And now it's really, a question about just how do we deal with this politically, more systematically, to secure and stabilize Europe in this very shaky political time. So I'm very happy to be joined by this panel. It's a quite almost pan-European panel. We have at least 3-4 countries, depending on how you count it, represented. And so we have Marta Rybczynska. She's a network security expert with 2 decades of open source experience, including in embedded systems and secure development. She works with the Eclipse Foundation and the Yocto project on open source security. And we have Wojciech Furmankiewicz. He leads the pre-sale teams at Red Hat in Central and Eastern Europe, supporting technology strategy across infrastructure, cloud, and open source adoption. We have Kuba Pivovar, the head of Spoltech at Centrum Cyfrowe, a researcher and author on the societal impacts of new technologies, and he combines an academic and industry experience, including Google, focusing on data bias and innovation. And we have Sebastian Reible, who is still here after a long day yesterday for the Open Source Business Conference that he ran. He's the director of the EU Government Affairs at Appel, the European Open Source Business Association, background in computer science and European policymaking. And we have Emil Brock. He's SUSE's open source ambassador and also a co-founder of the Dutch Open Source Business Alliance. Works with open source stakeholders across Europe. And first, I will direct it straight to Sebastian, the first question. How do you understand open source and open collaboration as a tool to balance digital sovereignty and competitiveness? This is something that I really want to hammer home in this conference.
Thank you very much. So it's not very much out of humbleness that I sat down on the chair. It was the last one that was left over. But I was also thinking that the couch chairs are a bit like, you sit like this. That's not very flattering in the photo. So I'll get up right away again because the photo is being taken right now. I'm starting to lose track also of what I was going to answer to your question. But, so I think open source, it is very, very worthy not only saying open source software anymore, but saying open source technology. And I think you've done that quite well throughout the conference because the various open source technologies that we have so much to give policy, and in particular in the landscape that we are in with the challenges that the European Union and its member states, Poland included, face. The open source technology has so many answers to give in that it has transparency, it allows for control, it reduces dependencies, and it allows businesses to work together and to collaborate on technology. Is that any kind of answer to your question?
No, absolutely. And I think this thing about, let's say, having a lot to give, is it a problem of... because my instinct is that it's not realized to the level that it could be. Would you say, is it a problem of there's a lack of demand for input from, let's say, the government side? Or is it a lack of action from, let's say, the open source stakeholders in presenting themselves as that partner in solving these problems?
No, I think we're getting there. I think governments have started realizing what potential open source has from several of the perspectives. From the technological perspective, the fact that open source is already there and you can make use of it now in the face of, let's maybe not say foreign adversaries, but companies that are so incumbent and so big on the market. What can we put against them? Open source is already there. And in terms of the open source industry, I think this is the greatest example that we can give. We are getting together at these types of conferences with so many of the brilliant minds of the innovators from the open source field. But yes, more organization is more better.
Kuba, I would like to direct the question to you as well. You can take it in whatever direction you want, but really, this digital sovereignty and competitiveness, these are, I would say, for at least anyone working in the policy space, these are the questions we keep on being bombarded with and we need to be able to answer. How do you see these things being connected if you connect them with open source?
Yeah, I would like to take a step back and come back to what you said before about digital sovereignty and the angle that you propose, which is coming from the security perspective. For me, there's a difference between security and feeling secure. Security comes from the infrastructure, comes from the fact that there is a infrastructure in place that makes sure that we are safe. Feeling secure is kind of dependent on the infrastructure, but not necessarily. You can feel insecure in a very secure environment, or the other way around. You can feel secure in very insecure environment. And I think that the infrastructure part would be more about open source, and feeling secure would be more about open collaboration. And tying that back into digital sovereignty, I think that these are two crucial components for it to happen, because with open source, with open collaboration, we have transparency, we have control over what's happening. With competitiveness, I think that when we mix in the open movement, the open source, what comes to mind, in the first place, is, for instance, vendor lock-in avoidance. Like for instance, making sure that if we're choosing a vendor for our services we want to do, we're making sure that these vendors are we're not necessarily tied to these vendors, meaning that we are absolutely reliant on what they have to offer, absolutely reliant on their view of, let's say, our business or things like that. But also that includes open approach to data, to research and innovation, meaning that we do, as researchers, have access to open knowledge. We have access to somebody else's research so that we can, orchestrate our work and not duplicate, for instance, research that has been done across Europe.
And then I'm thinking, Marta, because we have security in the title, and we were very happy that you could join us in this panel, because we wanted to make sure that angle from an open source security point of view was also reflected in this conversation, because of course, there's a lot of encapsulated in the term security. But if you look at, let's say, if you connect the dots between your work with open source security, digital sovereignty, competitiveness, how are you linking those things together?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. Because the open source security is mostly about protecting things that we know. And that's pretty much different from protecting things that we do not know. If you use proprietary software, you may feel secure, as Kuba said, but you do not know what you are actually running. On the other hand, if you are running open source, at least theoretically, you may have a look, and you should be able to know everything. In practice, you do not know everything because the complexity is too high. But in case of a problem, you can investigate, you can fix the issue, or in most cases, you can hire someone who can fix the issue, and then you can redeploy with the fix. In the case of a proprietary software solution, you have to go to the vendor, wait until the vendor releases the fix, if they decide to do so, and during the time, the attackers may get to your system. So for me, security and open source are absolutely linked with digital sovereignty, with competitiveness, because it creates also a common ground for the security work. So it's all linked together in the subject.
And then I'm thinking in terms of, Adriana in the intervention right before talked about, let's say, let's call it maybe the geopolitical turmoil that we've almost gotten used to now. It's been going on for quite a few years. I'd like to turn to Emil and Wojciech as, let's say, company representatives who are directly engaging and representing companies that sell and products and services around open source. What are the concrete open source? What are the concrete solutions in these unstable times? Like, what do you solve that proprietary alternatives can't? You start, Emil.
I think it's vital that we as competitors, clearly we are competitors and it's good that there are competitors in this market, but that at some parts we really work together. So for example, in Appel, in DOSBOS, OSBOS, business associations, that we together are showing the world that open source is mature, that open source is everywhere, and that you can choose which open source solution you want to go for. And at SUSE we have a definition around the sovereignty topic. We call it open by design and sovereign by choice. And that's valid for SUSE, but that's just as valid for our competitors in this market. So we really like to dance together and not fight together with our competitors in the open source industry.
And Wojciech, maybe just to jump on that then, this point of choice, what's perhaps a moot in a way a self-evident question, but maybe you could also talk a bit about how is this like user choice and choice linked to digital sovereignty?
So freedom of choice is absolutely the most important, that the value we deliver. But coming back about what our companies are doing, right? It's okay. When you think about any company or maybe any country, even okay, let's stick to company like banks or something. There are multiple of them. They compete, right? But when you look at their technology stack, around 80% is exactly the same. They build their specific differentiator, right? But there's actually a lot of good reasons to sit together and work and develop those areas which are common, right? So this is the power of collaboration. They solve problems which are bigger than a single company can do, right? And then open source, that's the power of disruption, of innovation. It's possible because of this this collaboration, right? But then also with the package, you come with some imperfections, some risks, something. If someone ever tried to create a solution, enterprise solution, their own way, or the DIY using open source components, right? There is some leadership that is needed. There are a lot of decisions you need to take. It requires expertise, requires experience, requires a lot of failures from the past that you can see and make good decisions. And then to the security thing, it's the vulnerability or any security issue may happen in any environment at any time. There's no single point in time that you can say your system is secured, right? It's just a constant process. It's like I call it a hamster wheel. You need to fix it, right? It's a lot of energy that companies like Red Hat do, and it's invisible. We just do it because we care. We want to make those solutions really rock solid. And only last year there was like in average 11 different security advisories every single day, including Sundays, etc. So it's a lot of work that we do. That's the value you ask for, right? Why? That's about leadership. That's about something that is consumable. It's an enterprise-ready solution, really. So that's That makes sense.
And then, Martha, I would like to come back to you with a question. Just like, what do you see as what is the gap? Could you theorize a bit about what prevents, let's say, the open source topic from being more systematically integrated into national, let's call it digital infrastructure projects, but I guess it's more in this broader conversation of security, stability, and resilience that we're trying to get at. What is the gap?
A few years ago, the open source world lived in the funny, nice place with unicorns when everyone can develop their code. The only thing that is important is functionality. The law doesn't apply. Eventually, maybe copyright law applies, but there are no regulations. And we just talk about tech. And in the recent years, the open source world learned that the law applies to them with the CRA. There were events like the fact of, for example, some Linux kernel maintainers being removed because they links with Russian military complex. That was also a shock for the open source world because sanctions historically have never applied to open source. And at the same time, the governing bodies have realized that open source is basically everywhere, in all products, and that there are those single persons in Nebraska that's called comic in the open source world, saying that there is a single person that is maintaining a project that the whole internet depends on. And the truth is that there's no single project like that. There are like 100 projects like that. And finally, governments realized that the situation looks like that. Open source is everywhere. There are those critical projects that are quite often one-person project, one maintainer projects. So there are actions happening, but we have like 20 years of backlog to fill, and yet there's a big gap also of understanding. Until not long ago, open source was mostly cost reduction. And we sometimes see this misconception still. Open source means zero cost. No. Open source doesn't mean zero cost. Open source means zero direct cost for person who is using it. Open source has the cost of the development, of the maintenance, of the security fixes. So we are bridging this understanding gap, but we still haven't found a sustainable funding model for open source solutions that we can use for the years to come in all of our infrastructure. The Sovereign Tech Agency is one attempt of solving this problem, but I think that we need a global solution that actually works, because we do not have it right now.
Just to then play the devil's advocate in this situation, that sounds somewhat worrying. What is this? We can't rely on this. What should we do? Should we just abandon open source? What do we do? Because we've argued here at the same time that this is something that governments should bet on in terms of solve its digital sovereignty. How do we combine these two things? This is a tricky question, Martha, but yes, you have these particular challenges of sustainability in open source. Whose responsibility is it? Because we also need open source to work to solve these great challenges. Emil, maybe you want to jump in?
Yeah, representing the Dutch Open Source Business Alliance. If you pay for open source, if you pay for the support on it, we take that risk for you. We have invested a lot of money in making sure that the software that we bring to our customers is compliant with Cyber Resilience Act, with NIS2. So if you as a customer are willing to pay for the support on your open source, you also pay for this guarantee. You also pay for the support on it, and you pay for SBOMs.
Yeah, Sebastian?
If I can jump in there, I mean, you already discussed it in your discussion with Adriana, the fact that governments are responsible for this infrastructure to work, to continue to work. It's quite evident for technologists to know that open source is everywhere, but it continues to be a struggle when discussing with policymakers and trying to make them understand the fact that open source is so integral to everything that's our daily life. And I think that continuing that discussion and continuing making them aware of that fact is what's hugely important, and that must ultimately lead to not only them supporting tech directly by financing the development of security fixes and setting up funds that try to make sure that funding is there for fixing stuff, but also encouraging more business for open source businesses and fostering this environment where it becomes self-paying and where it is not suddenly a huge investment to maintain the security, but where it is just part of the daily investment that we have in the technology that we use and rely on.
I have I would say Martha most explicitly pointed out, I think, the kind of red thread so far in the conversation, which is this gap between, let's say, open source communities, projects, and companies and governments. And perhaps it's been a fairly comfortable position for open source developers to, have that gap protecting them. Not too many tricky questions that came from the government side. What are you guys doing? What can you do for us, etc. But I think that we've reached a conclusion from the conversations today that this gap needs to be bridged. Of course, DOSPA, Appel are efforts to do this. But I'm thinking, Kuba, from, especially at a Polish national level, but feel free to go broader than that. How can we ensure, what can we do to just support more open source community representatives, SMEs, technical voices to be included in the policy dialogues? What can our side do instead of just asking to be included?
Yeah, I would start with a very tricky thing, which is money. You said before that money not always has to be a solution. I think that in many cases, throwing money at a problem could solve certain problems, obviously. And by money, I mean have targeted projects, goals towards using and proving that open source in certain circumstances just works and is just a solution. It also includes proper procurement, which is tailored in a way in which open source should be included in proposals, in grants, in all these targeted actions that require money. But I also think that in order to do that, not only we should stop preaching about open source as something that we really like, but also start using it at the government level, at the public administration level, in schools, etc. But also make sure that through, for instance, capacity building, like awareness raising within the public officials should also happen. Because, we have open source. We know that it's nice. We've attended many different conferences. We met a lot of interesting people. We think this is something that we can actually do. But do we really understand, we as policymakers, like the decision makers, do we really understand what has it been? And only then I think there will be a proper ecosystem for other smaller players, bigger players to be included to the table, so that all the open source, open discussion is not only between, let's say, Ministry of Digital Affairs and big tech companies, but also smaller companies as well.
Yeah, because as I said in my opening statements, it is interesting because I don't want to sound too negative. If you look at the new digital strategy from the Polish government, there's a very clear open source component to it, and have very concrete recommendations. And there's part of me that feels, what took them so long? But at the same time, there are these very concrete goals explicitly set out by the Polish government now. And I mean, one says, that, okay, we need to build an open source entity within the government. Would you say, how do we get the Polish ecosystems of experts and excellence that have either worked in open source program offices in industry, have experience with engaging with OSPOs, etc., which is essentially the term for what this kind of entity is. How do we ensure, it's a continuation very specifically, that the government gets the right support in building this? Their intention and wish has now been explicitly made. And there is such a lot of excellence among the Polish open source ecosystem. I'm throwing it to you now, Wojciech. What will Red Hat do? What will you do to make sure that this support is there?
Yeah, so first of all, we started talking, or maybe there's a one open source which magically happens and everyone can use it, right? But actually there are people behind. There are projects, like multiple projects, there are developers, and there is an expertise. So if you think who to ask for help in terms of problem, in terms of maintaining, upgrading, whatever, properly using this, then you look at the contributor list, right? And that's the answer. How to make sure. There are a lot of Polish developers. We actually have innovation in our DNA. I think history taught us to be really innovative. And there are a lot of beautiful talents in Poland who actually contribute in a major, very important open source project. Those that we really, that everyone is using, not just Linux, but multiple things. AI is a good example. So just to understand, my kind of advice is look at the contributor list. Who is claiming to be an expert, right? Because at the moment of problem, we need an expert. We don't need someone who signed up the support contract only, right? So that's the very big misunderstanding, and also I believe this should be also somehow regulated. This would make a lot of sense in terms of sovereignty, security, and overall quality of the solutions.
But if we put some of the responsibility back on the government, let's say, what other best practices and examples do we have if we look across Europe where governments have done things in order to, let's say, take advantage of or creating avenues to bring this expertise into their policymaking, and then decisions have been taken that actually realize value from open source to, well, their citizens, which at the end of the day is the constituency they have to deal with. What good examples are there out there that could be guiding examples for the Polish government? Yeah, Emil, I'd say.
Yeah, I can give an example from the Dutch world, because what happened in the Netherlands when we said we have a DOSBA, the Dutch government came to us and said, that's very nice, but can you please help us how we can make tenders in the future in such a way that they at least not exclude open source, because traditionally they are often made in such a way that they are really made for proprietary software. And as we know, some things are really different in the open source world. So we had a workshop with around 40 procurement directors of the Dutch government, where we helped them in a completely agnostic open source way how they could make a tender in such a way that open source at least is not excluded, and preferably even by the law in the Netherlands since 2002, open source has a privilege above proprietary software.
And Sebastian, when you sit in your policy meetings with policymakers from across Europe, what are the top examples that you bring up as here, do this?
Yeah, I think what Emil has just lined out is also what we have, for example, submitted to the public evaluation of or question for contributions that the Commission has made regarding the upcoming reform of the Public Procurement Directive. So definitely put some pieces in there when it comes to supporting those actors in the field that also actively contribute to the development of projects that actually do contribute back, that contribute to the overall open source ecosystem. And I'll say, yeah, I mean, so I think this is a big piece of legislation that we can actually attack and that we're going to work on. A campaign is in the making, and yeah, a lot of submissions have been made there.
But if we take, for example, let's say, you know, the Polish government is meant to build an open source program office. If you're looking at other governments who have done something similar like this, do you know, can you think of an example of, like, you know, the Dinum in France, for example? Like, what, there are a lot of models out there. Where would you point the Polish government? Who should they talk to?
I think, thank you for the hint. Dinum and Zendis in Germany are really the two examples that we can look at right now. They do it very differently in how they implement it, and that has to do with I think the space that they're acting in. The German initiative of creating this public-owned company, Zendis, that creates a product making use of the products of open source businesses that already exist, that already are there in the market, is I think something to really look towards. And there is also a lot of merit in how the French approach it from their view. But obviously, speaking for open source businesses, if you know that in your market there are these experts that already actively contribute to the open source ecosystem, that actually make these cogwheels turn, do invest in them and do buy their products and do encourage public authorities to invest into that ecosystem.
One, you know, continuing in the same vein of this question, because very, it's like a simple truth we have at OpenForum Europe, is that if you want to talk to a government employee that understands open source and appreciates open source, go to the national cybersecurity agencies. There will always be some of the most technical people there, and there's almost a guarantee that the more technical the government employee is, the greater the appreciation for open source. And I'm thinking, Marta, here, just from more specifically a cybersecurity point of view, is there a country, is there a system, like when you've engaged directly with or seen open source communities engage with governments on a cybersecurity point of view, is there a country that stands out to you that could be interesting to learn from in how they deal with this?
I cannot say in many different countries how it looks like. I live in France, so I have examples from the French world that are less known from outside. There's a lot of open source people in French education, and they are trying to implement open source tools for teachers to develop or use open source. And that makes me think about sustainability of open source by education. There are a lot of people trying to enter into the IT field, either by higher education or by coding camps or different places like that. In France, at least, all those programs practically have internships at some point of the program. And I do take people at internships in open source projects. Those work flawlessly. And I think if there were more companies taking interns to work on open source projects in companies, in education, and teachers, technical, personal in education, showing them that it's possible, that could be a way to do multiple things at the same time to have people who know how open source works, not only at the technical level, but also at the communication level, licensing level, and everything else. But also people who actually know more generally how open source works. And if we are missing that education, we have that gap between the open source and government. If we have more people who know practically how open source work, even if they do not work in open source at the end, will make the global situation better.
Yesterday, I concluded the day with the open source businesses, the conference that Sebastian organized yesterday. I concluded by talking quite positively about the change, that we see a lot more discussions, questions, attention for the different open source organizations' input to these conversations around strategic autonomy and competitiveness. And here, Wojciech, I would like to ask you, what can Poland specifically bring into this conversation? How do you see, let's say, a Polish perspective, which, you know, with all the open source excellence that exists here, what can specifically Poland contribute with here?
So Poland is in a very unique location, situation, etc. Right? We are on a kind of border of the east part where it's really dangerous here. Poland have a lot of talents. We just spoke about it, right? So this is something we absolutely can contribute, and we do it in multiple projects. But also, as a great example, Poland has a lot of open source in our government systems. The election system runs on OpenShift in this particular case. The M-Obywatel also works on open source, right? And many, many more. And the agriculture systems, and it's just the adoption is really beautiful, and it is out because I work on those projects. I can say I can see a very good maturity, like they understand, right, the risk, how to properly design the system, etc. So a lot of beautiful examples we can share with the other countries, and also I travel a lot around Europe, and I speak, right, and I feel just they're jealous, or no, I mean, positive way, right? But they want to have such systems, and it's based on open source. So I'm just feeling proud of, and absolutely we can be a good example.
And then just to kind of round it off, and just to get a little bit of a round of, let's call it some kind of call to action, because it's very easy, this is my day job, to get a bit frustrated with the slow movements of government decisions taken. There's good reason why, obviously, democratic government takes its time to bring about a decision. But just right now, like, what can you recommend to, Polish stakeholders, the individual developer, an organization, a small company owner here in Warsaw, in Poland? What can you do to participate in the shaping of, let's say, broader EU digital policy? Sebastian, I'll bring it to you. Where do you start? How do you engage in these conversations?
Very concretely, today we talked about this with a couple of people, and yesterday as well. How can we actually carry forward these issues into the policy field? And I think it is too much for an individual and too much for a small business to do, too much for a startup. So obviously, I'm also speaking from a point of being one of those interest organizations and having representing them. But do organize, do find contacts, do gather around, make conferences, and if you cannot make your own association, find contacts in other countries maybe that already know how to do it, and eventually build that movement, carry the message forward together.
Kuba, maybe I'll do a little bit of a round, because, I mean, if there's one thing that I appreciate when I'm in Warsaw, is that it's a very mature network of, let's say, digital policy advocacy in civil society. Very high-level discussions. But if I push you to be really focused on the specific open source question because of the increased demand on answers on those questions, what would you say? What can a Polish individual or company or person who's interested in these topics, what can they do?
Yeah, I would definitely double down on what Sebastian said about organizing. Like, you know, when you organize, your voice is heard more. It's better heard. It's more vivid. But I also say that maybe one example, like if you create, I don't know, cutting edge technology and you use open source to do that, do make sure that people know and understand how did you do that, how did open source helped you create what you created, what you achieved, and what are the benefits of using that instead of other proprietary solutions.
Martha, let's do a round. Last call of action. Tell all the Poles, what should they do?
If you are running a company that is using open source, so if you are running a company, basically you are using open source, then figure out what you actually use and donate to those projects.
Wojciech?
Yeah, supporting projects that work and you see the future and the progress and everything and business value, right? That makes a lot of sense. But also contribute. I mean, be open, be transparent. There are a lot of companies that create beautiful things, but not open source, right? And it's a pity because they need to understand it will not stop not harm their business. It will just let them grow faster. So yeah, that's it. Being open, being transparent, collaborative, and have fun.
Emil?
Two things. One is set up a POSBA, because that will give you the possibility to organize and to really have one voice. And if you have then this one voice, the second thing is make sure that you have, I would say, arguments towards the lobby which is happening right now from proprietary companies. They are trying to replace the lock, if they are in an American lock, with a local lock. And I would say, please make sure that our customers will have the power over their own locks. So don't go from one vendor lock-in to the next. Make sure if you move away from proprietary that you move towards open source.
Good. Good point to end. And let me then just round off, because I think that we haven't been super clear with this information, that before anyone even starts thinking about heading back to their homes, trains, flights, or hotels, we would all like to invite you to JIC. It's on Belvederska 44. It's quite close for our, what we call the Open Tech After Work. Since I personally don't exactly know where this is, but I know it's quite close. Elżbieta, could you raise your hand just to show, because I know you know where it is. So if you don't know the exact address, just follow the lead of Elżbieta, and she will take you to the bar, and I would be happy to buy you a beer. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you to the sponsors, partners that have spent many hours in organizing this and setting this up. And I guess if I were to end on one point, and mirroring some of these last words, yeah, I would love it if in 6 months' time, we will have the first signs of a Polish open source business association that can be sort of nexus to bring these conversations forward and be a trusted partner of the Polish government to achieve its digital strategy goals. Well, thank you very much, and I hope to see you very soon. Bye.
Thank you.